The Kremlin denies bombing the Zaporozhye nuclear plant and calls it foolish to accuse Russia of bombing it, insisting that Russia controls and protects the site while accusing Ukraine of repeated shelling. The Hamas movement rejects US President Donald Trump's 20-point Gaza plan, opposing disarmament of its armed forces and the deployment of foreign troops. Hamas calls the presence of foreign forces a new form of occupation, accusing the plan of ignoring Palestinian needs. Italy and Greece have now urged Israel to ensure the safety of activists aboard a Gaza aid flotilla and allow consular protection. The two countries proposed that aid be delivered through the Catholic Church to avoid direct confrontation, but activists rejected the idea. The US government is shut down after Senate rejected a short-term spending measure halting critical economic data and furloughing 750,000 federal workers at a daily cost of $400 million. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen warns Europe is going through a Russian hybrid war with drone flights and incursion across the continent. She urged a very strong, unified response to counter Moscow's ongoing threats to European security. A severe rainstorm in Ukraine's Odessa has killed at least 9 people, including one child, after the city received nearly 2 months' worth of rainfall in just 7 hours. Mayor Gennady Trukhanov has warned that no sewer system could withstand such flooding. A powerful 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck the central Philippines, killing at least 69 people on Cebu Island, with officials warning the death toll could rise as rescuers search collapsed buildings. The quake has injured 147 people and damaged 22 buildings and triggered 379 aftershocks so far. Taiwan has rejected US pressure to shift half of its semiconductor production to America, with the island's chief tariff negotiator declaring that it will not agree to such demands. Big story of the hour. A Hamas spokesperson has rejected key elements of the US President Donald Trump's recently unveiled Gaza peace plan, stating that the movement cannot accept two critical provisions. According to the Hamas representative, the plan favors Israeli interests and overlooks Palestinian needs. Hamas opposes the disarmament of its armed forces and the deployment of foreign troops in Gaza, viewing the latter as a new form of occupation. The White House's comprehensive plan proposes temporary external administration of Gaza and the introduction of international stabilization forces. It explicitly excludes Hamas from returning to power in the territory, and a point Israel supports. Talks in Doha involve Hamas, Qatar, Egypt and Turkey may lead to revisions of the US proposals, though specific changes remain unclear. Meanwhile, the US has given Hamas 2 to 3 days to respond to the plan. Joining me on the telecast is Peter Baum. He is the foreign editor, Weekly Blitz. He's joining me from London. Peter, thank you very much. And of course, what do you make of the Hamas representative who has come out and very strongly opposed the 20-point Gaza plan? He says that the plan is undermining the rights of the Palestinians and is in favor of Israeli government and Israeli forces.
Yeah, I don't think anyone should be surprised about the rejection by Hamas of the plan, albeit it seems that they would have agreed to 19 out of the 21 proposals. As we spoke about yesterday, rejection of the plan only serves the extremists on both sides. We saw yesterday how the extremists in the Netanyahu government were very negative about the plan, even condemning it. And now we see Hamas coming out and rejecting it too. But Hamas have no support. They are isolated, whereas the Israelis now and the plan itself has huge support. So here is where politics must come into play. This is where all the media, all those in favour of the plan must get the Palestinian people who have been leaving Gaza City in droves on side with the plan. This is where all the UN agencies giving support to those people who have been forced out of Gaza City can get them on side, interviewing them, and get them to reject Hamas. If that can be done, Hamas will be totally isolated. Now, if Hamas stick to this rejection, then Trump has suggested that he will allow Israel to finish the job, and that means to destroy Hamas militarily. And now that the vast majority of civilians have left the area of conflict, the only risky decision here is what Hamas will do with the hostages and whether the Israeli public will continue to support the conflict within Gaza.
Right. Right. Is there any possibility, talking about, two of these big, points of difference that Hamas has raised is, number one, disarmament of the Hamas operatives, and second of all, the Israeli troops that will continue to stay around Gaza. Those are the two big points of contention that have been raised by Hamas. And again, we have seen in the several months that have gone by, US President Donald Trump has, issued threats, warnings, tried to coerce Hamas, but nothing has really come to fruition. So what are the chances? What is the big deal about the 20-point Gaza plan? It continues to be, the headlines all across the globe.
With one major exception, if I may. The fact is that Hamas now are totally isolated in the Arab world. All the Arab nations, and including other Muslim nations such as Pakistan and Indonesia, have come out in support of the Trump plan, as has the EU. It has got majority approval. The only rejectionists are the extremists on both sides. That's on the Israeli government, who potentially could bring down the Netanyahu administration if they leave the government, and Hamas themselves. But Hamas have no support. Now, the only thing that Hamas can cling on to, they're trying to cling on to their military influence, but that will be diluted furthermore if the conflict goes on. So the only thing they have left is political credibility. And it seems that at this moment in time, they don't have any support for the stance they're taking. Now, in terms of the two rejectionist part of the plans, hanging on to their arms, let's say, I don't think that will be accepted by the Israeli government nor by Trump. The idea of foreign troops being present, now that's something that could be negotiated, but it could be that those foreign troops, if they comprise of troops from Arab nations, that could be something that could be, I think, more easily negotiated. But the sticking point will still be whether Hamas want to retain their arms, and I don't think that would be, that's not palatable to the Israelis nor to the Americans.
Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining me on the telecast and sharing your views. Mourners gathered at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Gaza's Deir al-Balah to bid farewell to the Palestinians that were killed in Israeli airstrikes on central Gaza. Earlier, Israeli warplanes conducted strikes in neighboring Al-Daraj in eastern Gaza City. The strikes killed several people and left many injured. The exact number of deaths remains uncertain and has not yet been made official. After the strikes, displaced Palestinians in Deir al-Balah stated that earlier Israeli Defense Forces had advised them to move to the area as safe, but it has now been bombarded. Previously, the Israeli military has also stated that it would close the last remaining route for residents from southern Gaza to access the north as it presses its offensive. Displaced Palestinians will be affected by the bloc. They have expressed their views on the Gaza peace plan and the continued military offensive.
جينا هنا بعد التنكيل في مناطق بيت لاهيا والدمار الشامل الذي حصل في بيت لاهيا. وقد أبلغنا الجيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أن نتوجه إلى أماكن آمنة في هذه المناطق وتحديدا في دير البلح. ولكن للأسف الشديد تأبى آلة الحرب الإسرائيلية إلا أن تقصف أرواح بريئة جدا ليس لها علاقة لا من قريب ولا من بعيد في أي نوع من أنواع السلاح أو المقاومة. ولكن للأسف أنا أتحدث بكل وضوح أنه لا يوجد أي مكان آمن في قطاع غزة. خطة ترامب أو خطة أي كان فليوقفوا هذه الحرب المسعورة. نحن كشعب فلسطيني، نحن كأبناء قطاع غزة لا نتمنى إلا أن تقف هذه الحرب المسعورة لتوقف آلة القتل المسعورة على أبناء شعبنا الفلسطيني. هذا ما يتمناه جميع أبناء شعبنا الفلسطيني، هي وقف هذه الحرب المسعورة على.
The situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is reportedly under control, according to the Russian-installed operator. The plant has come under repeated fire from Ukrainian forces, but staff are taking all necessary measures to ensure safety. The Kremlin called it foolish to accuse Russia of bombing a facility it controls, emphasizing that the plant remains under Russian security. In a separate development, a Ukrainian drone strike killed Volodymyr Leontiev, a Russian-installed official in Nova Kharkova, Kherson Oblast. Leontiev, who had held several senior positions since April 2022, was wounded by a Baba Yaga drone and died later in the hospital. He had been convicted in absentia by Ukrainian courts for collaboration and the abduction and torture of local officials and journalists. Ukraine has not commented on the strike. Andrew Latham on the telecast with me. Andrew, in wake of these strikes and counter-strikes that are being exchanged between Ukraine and Russia, there does not seem an end in sight. It has also been, the Ukraine-Russia war has been downplayed for the past few days and weeks, where the highlight of international media platforms and the international leaders has been focused on the Gaza peace plan, and before that the conflict, of course, at the UNGA, those speeches that were made, the impassioned speeches that were made by US President Donald Trump, the Israeli Prime Minister, of course, that meeting that was held on the sidelines where Netanyahu was invited to the White House. There was that phone call that was made to the Qatari leadership. So all these developments have, you think, overshadowed the Ukraine-Russia war as we see?
Well, yes, in terms of media coverage and in terms of popular consciousness, if I can put it that way, the Gaza war and, of course, the UN General Assembly, the recognition of Palestinian statehood, issues like that, have kind of pushed the Ukraine war off the front page, as it were. It doesn't mean the war has stopped grinding on. And we see two sorts of evidentiary points in that connection, one of which is, I don't think anybody's deliberately attacking the nuclear facilities at Zaporizhzhia, but the battle space does encompass it and potentially can interdict the roads that lead into it and the power cables that lead into it. And that leaves the power plant running on emergency generators for days on end. And that's not a plan. That's more of a prayer, I think, than a plan. And then, of course, there's Ukraine's deep battle operational concept. They're not just fighting the Russians at the front, they're fighting them behind the front, and not just interdicting military supplies and factories and whatnot, but going after the administration in the occupied territories. So striking against this particular quote-unquote collaborator is of a piece with that strategy. Not just go after the Russian military at the front lines, go at the Russian military infrastructure behind the lines, and go after the administrative structure in the occupied territories. I rather suspect that in the next little while, the Ukraine war will be on the front page again.
Right. Talking about the Tomahawk missiles that Ukraine has been urging the United States to provide to it. Yesterday, the Vice President J.D. Vance also referred to it and saying that U.S. is considering providing those missiles which are going to help Ukraine strike deep into Russian territory. Russia has downplayed it, saying that this is something that, while America considers, is not going to be followed through. What may be the implications? Is the war going to further escalate?
I'm not sure it's going to escalate. The United States has some surplus weapons, but it needs to keep its own magazines full in case there's a conflict in Taiwan, over Taiwan, for example, or elsewhere. It's not like Washington can simply turn over all the Tomahawk missiles, which are long-range strike missiles, which are of a piece with the strategy, the Ukrainian strategy I just outlined. But it really doesn't matter how many of these weapons Washington transfers to Kyiv. It's not going to change the fundamental dynamics, which unfortunately for Ukraine are not in its favor. Russia is in a slow and bloody way making its way forward. It is winning on the battlefield, not decisively, but in a grinding fashion. And these missiles, while they may, certain strikes may make the news, they are not going to turn the tide. And that's providing that Washington, in fact, does provide these weapons and at scale.
Right, absolutely. Andrew, stay on with me. We'll shift our focus to another big development. The Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has called on Europe to deliver a very strong answer to Russia's ongoing hybrid war. Speaking at an EU leaders meeting in Copenhagen, Frederiksen described Russia as the sole threat willing to challenge Europe's security.
Hope that everybody recognizes now that there is a hybrid war, and one day it's Poland, the other day it's Denmark, and next week it will probably somewhere else that we see sabotage, or we see drones flying, or we see you can there are many different kind of episodes. So I see this from a European perspective. There is only one country that are willing to threat us, and it is Russia, and therefore we need a very strong answer back.
The Danish Prime Minister's warning follows a series of mysterious drone flights and airspace violations across Europe, including the drone disruptions at several Danish airports. While authorities have not directly linked these incidents to Russia, Frederiksen has emphasized that they reveal serious vulnerabilities in Europe's defenses. She urged European nations to rearm, innovate and strengthen collective defense capabilities. Frederiksen also stressed the need for closer coordination with NATO allies and proposed measures such as a drone wall to protect EU's eastern borders from further hybrid attacks. Other European leaders echoed her concerns, marking a growing recognition of Russia as a persistent threat, even short of a formal war. According to media reports, the European Commission will propose cutting steel import quotas by nearly half and hiking duties on volumes above those levels to 50%, in line with tariffs imposed by US and Canada. These measures are part of a new package for the steel sector that is expected to be unveiled next week. The bloc's current steel safeguards will expire in June 2026. The European Union had already tightened current steel import quotas by 15% in April. The Commission is now investigating market trends for potential aluminium safeguards as well as export duties on scrap metal. Steel jumped into the spotlight early this year after US President Donald Trump hiked tariffs on foreign steel and aluminium imports to 50%. Andrew's back on the telecast with me. Andrew, this tariff war has impacted European Union's economy to quite an extent. So much so that there is deliberation and reconsideration of the safeguards that the EU is now considering, keeping in mind its steel consumption and aluminium imports as well.
Yes, well, it's keeping up with the Joneses, as it were. If the U.S. has these tariffs in place, it makes Chinese exports have to go somewhere, and they're likely to go to Europe. And it should be mentioned that these Chinese steel and aluminium exports are highly subsidized by the state, and it's not really a competitive market. So what the Europeans are proposing, and what the U.S. has done, is to level the playing field, as it were, to take the advantage from the state-subsidized production off the table and put European manufacturers on a level playing field with Chinese manufacturers. Now, it remains to be seen if that's going to work, and it's also worth pointing out that some European manufacturers are also state-subsidized. I don't think it's radical decoupling of the Chinese and European economies. It's not of a piece with that. I do like the metaphor leveling the playing field and removing the quote-unquote unfair advantage that Chinese exporters have in the European market.
Do you also think that European Union will be able to sustain itself by the domestic market of steel and aluminium production? It has been reliant on international markets, other countries so far, and if they are going to reduce their import quota and put additional tariffs and duties, will this adversely impact their production and their GDP?
Well, yes, I think what we're seeing, and we're seeing it in droves with the Trump administration, but we're seeing it around the world, I think, is that the era of free trade, post-Cold War, but also during the Cold War within the Western world, the World Trade Organization and its entire ethos of promoting free and fair trade, I think that institutional architecture, that set of legal norms and rules and institutions is all beginning to fall apart. And we're beginning to see the fragmentation of the global economy into either national economies, if the nations are big enough, the US and China, or India, or regional economies, in the case of the European Union. And I think that is inevitable. It's a long-term trend. I don't know if any particular government or international organization can arrest that development. Is it a welcome development? I think in the long run, probably not. Peace and prosperity tend to go hand in hand, and to the extent that these blocs actually, in the long run, undermine global prosperity, they're likely to undermine global peace as well.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us on NewsX World and sharing your perspective. Shifting our focus to other big developments. According to a senior rescue official, the death toll has increased in the Philippines earthquake to at least 69 after the country was struck by a 6.9 magnitude earthquake, leading to significant damage to infrastructure and human lives. Rescue operations are underway as authorities warn the death toll may rise amidst widespread damage to infrastructure and power lines. Rows of bodies covered with sheets were seen in Cebu, while residents mourned family members and neighbors. Officials are assessing the full extent of the damage as recovery operations are underway. Meanwhile, locals have shared their experiences describing the impact it had on their lives.
Gumuguho talaga, sir.
Paano?
Parang ginanon sa amin. Tapos yung kabilang side ng building namin bumagsak talaga. Mabuti yung mga tao nandito sa harapan lahat. Nakabahan po kami ngayon kasi palagi po may aftershock. Hanggang ngayon hindi namin mabibilang yung aftershock kung ilan ng aftershock ngayon. Kasi marami na kasi, sir. Kagabi pa hindi pa ako nakapahinga.
Nung nalala ko, yung anak ko, naiwan sa balay. Tapos may kapitbahay kami nga malaki. Tapos ang dadaanan nila, maliit lang. Tapos bumagsak yung mga semento. Salamat ako sa Ginoo kasi walang nangyari sa kanila. Pagdating ko namin doon, marami ng tao sa kasama namin. Hindi namin alam mo katapusan ba namin ngayon. Salamat lang sa Ginoo ka naluwas sa taon. Salamat kay Lord.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this bulletin of the World Report. Stay tuned on NewsX World for more news and updates.